got a really strange encounter for you tonight. I've got Samantha with me, and Samantha's family has owned a property in Oregon for many generations, and throughout the years, they've had several encounters with the family of Bigfoot creatures that are on the property, starting with her grandma. They used to warn them about the monkey man coming and taking them when they were kids playing out in the woods, but one night with her mom and dad, they were staying at home in their trailer, and they heard a really loud metallic type sound outside the property. Looked out the window, saw several of these creatures around the property. They woke up the next day, and there was a huge dent in her dad's truck with a large handprint. And then she's going to talk about a strange encounter she had with some juveniles that she caught out in their swimming pool when she was just a kid. This is a great one, a lot of information. It gets really strange, but before we get into any of that, I just want to say thanks for being here. If you've got an encounter you would like to send me, you can send it to me by email at MysteriesUknownPodcast@gmail.com. Let's jump right into the story. Samantha, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Josh. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you here. I know there's a lot of things that you are going to be talking about tonight in several different encounters on this particular property. So if you would, kind of take us back to the beginning of this and walk us through this encounter.
It was around 2003 or 2004. I live in Oregon, and during that time, we had like a historic ice snowstorm that came through the area. So during this time, my dad was at home. Usually he would be off working. He was a truck driver, so most of the time he would be off on the road. He never believed in any of the Bigfoot stuff. He just thought that my mom and my sisters and I were being ridiculous, watching those shows and like that kind of stuff. But it wasn't until like we had that really bad snowstorm that we all started noticing something was off. My sisters, I have two younger sisters. They used to go and play in the woods and stuff, even in the snow. But when the snow got worse, so we lost power after like the first week because there was just so much snow and ice and stuff that came in. We noticed that like the woods got quieter. Things kind of were different. Even with how cold it was, it just seemed very odd for like the situation of what was going on. So it's about 2 weeks in, the snow is not letting up at all. And my sisters and I, we had been outside playing one day, kind of late. Our house was kind of on top of a hill where if you wanted to go into the quote unquote backyard, you would have to go down the road that my grandparents had built. Otherwise, it was about a 15-foot drop down from the back of the house. So you had to go down the road. We were just going down that road. It was great for sledding at the time. So we were just going down. And we started noticing that like there are certain areas in the snow where the ice and all those layers had been like crushed, and the new snow layers and stuff were kind of settling in. So we started noticing all these like, pretty big indents in the snow and ice. And we're knowing that it's not our dad because he's not going to be going out there. It's definitely not our mom. And we don't have anyone else, no relatives or anything else that would be going through the woods up to our house. So we just all kind of made a note of it. It was getting late. So we just decided, let's head back up to the house, take us like 10 minutes walking through the snow because it's so deep. It started to get dark. It's not very late out. It's probably like maybe 3 or 4, So we get up to the house, and our mom is surprised to see us in so early because usually, we're out there well into the sun already going down. She has to come and tell us to come inside because it's getting too cold, all that standard stuff. And, we start telling her about how we noticed the weird footprints in the snow. Just asking her, like, did you guys have to go over to the truck? Because it was kind of in the area where my dad would park his truck that he would drive to work. It was like an 80s F-150 or one of the really old Ford pickup trucks that was like an old farm truck. He would drive that every work today. And he would go and park basically on the side of a house off of a road there that my grandparents had made. So we noticed that the footsteps were kind of going up to the truck, but, again, like they were leading kind of from the woods area and not to the house or not any other direction where us people would be going. So we mentioned that to my mom. She's just like, oh, don't worry about it. It's probably your dad looking for some tool or something, because he left his tools out. Everything was okay. We started like getting, ready for bed around 8 or 9. And my sisters and my room were kind of next to each other. Then there was a bathroom. Then there's the living room and dining room, kitchen, and then my parents' room on the other side of the house. That's important because their room is directly across from that road and where my dad would park his truck. So we lived in a mobile home, and I don't know if anyone knows about them, but the really old ones, like what we were living in, that was probably constructed in like the early 90s at best, have super thin walls. You can hear basically everything through them. So we had all got ready for bed. A few hours later, I can't remember what exactly like woke me up. I think I needed to go to the bathroom or get a drink of water or something. But I got up and I left my room and I went out into like the dining room, living room area. And as soon as I'm out there, I had a habit of not turning on the lights. Something about living out in the country is even if you have your blinds down, if your lights are on, you can still be seen, unless you have like blackout curtains or stuff. And that wasn't around really when like we were out there. So we just had the habit of, you know, keep the light off at night unless you really need to see, just keep the light off, get to where you need to be, go back, you know. So I'm making my way over to like the living room, dining room area, and I hear a really loud yell, almost like that classic like Sasquatch yell that everyone hears. So I stop, and about that time, my mom comes out of her bedroom and into the living room, and she's like, "Did you hear that?" Well, yeah, like I'm frozen. I did not move. You know, I'm staring at our back door, which it has glass in it, and it has these little tiny, you know, thin little strips of plastic that is supposed to be like shades. But it was so thin that even when we had it closed, you could still see through it. So I'm just standing there thinking, does something see me? Because I can't see anything out there. And something just made a big noise. So she's like, come over here, come over here. So I went into her room and into their bathroom, which was attached to their room on the back of the house. And we still had all the lights off. We kind of huddled together, and they had a huge tub right next to a window that would look out over on the backyard. So we're just sitting there. And after a few minutes of us like getting down and being quiet, we hear it again, only this time it's a lot closer. And then we hear it again, and it's a lot closer. So to us, and from what I can remember, my mom and I agreeing at the time, in the morning, especially when we went to go out and look at this stuff, is it sounded angry. Like it was mad, but it was like mad about, I almost feel like the weather. Like it was mad about this ice. It was mad about this snow. Um, we think it had to do with its hunting because like it was so cold, a lot of animals did die. It was a cold front that came in, and you know, like I was saying, we had never had cold like that before. So I feel like it was mad that like food had gone away too. It yells a couple more times, and then we hear a big bang, almost like best way I can describe it is like a car crashing into another car, like a parked car or something. It's like metal bending, is what we hear. So immediately my dad gets up because he's just, we have the bathroom door open, you know. So we see him like sit up in bed being like, you know, what the blankety blank is going on? What are you guys doing? He thinks that someone somehow got up our steep hill. So the driveway going up to our house, just to like put this information in there, it, my dad used to drive truck quite often. That was his main job for several years, and he still does. Whenever he would bring one of those big semi trucks home, or he would have like dump trucks or any kind of truck come, we would always warn him, you need a running start going up our hill. If you stop for whatever reason, you're going to have to go all the way down about 3, 4 miles backwards and then come back up because there's like little ridges, it cuts through other hills. It's kind of complicated to get up there. So, you know, my dad, he sits up out of bed, he's like, how the blankety blank did someone get up here? Like, how did they hit my truck? Because he knows that his truck is the only one right there across from the room. There's nothing else that that sound could be, especially with how loud it was. So he yells at my mom and I to get flashlights and shine them out the windows there so he could see, because he's going to take his gun and he's going to go out and see. Because, you know, what is someone doing up here crashing into his truck? We grab our flashlights because he has some pretty good flashlights where you could see pretty far out into like the tree lines and stuff without needing to actually leave the house. So we grabbed those. We were shining them out the windows, but it wouldn't quite hit the truck. You could kind of see leading up to the truck, but you couldn't really see the truck itself with where he parked it, and just with how the windows were like kind of at the corner of the house there. So we watched my dad, tromp down through the yard, walk through the snow, get over to his truck, take like maybe 5 seconds, and then walk right back in and just tell us, go to bed, get your sisters, like sleep in the living room, just go to sleep. Like, don't talk about it, be quiet, just, it's done, it's over, just be quiet. So my mom and I are like, what did you see? Like, we didn't go out there. We don't want to go out there, but what did you see? Like, you have a gun. He has what we call a elephant gun. I couldn't tell you what kind of gun it actually is, but this is so loud that like even when you have ear protection in, it gets through it and you still hear it. And my mom was like, why didn't you shoot? Like, you should have been able to take whatever it was out. You should have been able to fire that, because he got it from my grandpa, who he was a hunter. So it should have been able to take out anything in our area. If something was going to attack you, just fire. You should have been okay. And he just, no, 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 go to sleep. Don't talk about it. It is what it is. Just turn off the lights, be in the living room, just zip it. That was it. So, of course, at this point, with the loud bang and especially the yelling that had gone on, my two younger sisters had woke up. So they're already coming out into the living room and they're like, why is dad yelling? What happened to his truck? Like, what was that other yelling that we heard before? I didn't realize that they were up when I had first got up and first heard the yelling and my mom grabbed me. I didn't know that they were just laying in their beds terrified, also hearing the noises and stuff. So we pretty much just stayed up until the sun came up. Just we didn't really have power, so we didn't have TV. We just have flashlights. So we were just, sitting around waiting. So as soon as the sun came up, we walk outside. So we were following behind her. And we walk over to the truck, and as we're turning the house and we can see the truck, we notice that like the truck's turned. And then as we're walking more, we see that the truck is actually like turned, like something pushed it. Like it was pushing it out of the way. So the road would be like here, the tree line is here. The truck was pushed like into the road. So my mom walked over to the truck and she looked at the passenger back right side, and she was like, there's like a big hand indent in the back of a truck. And it looks like where it had got pushed. The front of the truck was kind of in the same spot, but the back had been pushed, like something was just pushing it, like throwing something out of the way. And she was like, that has to be the noise that we heard last night. It has to be that metal noise, because he didn't have that spot before. If he did, your dad's not telling us that he got into an accident or whatever. And, she's sure that he would have said something. And then we look, and there's these huge like not footprints really, because you can't see them with all the snow and ice, but like there's these huge big gaps in the snow, like what we had noticed earlier. But because it hadn't snowed anymore, you could see like how it crashed through all the layers of the snow, and it was way bigger than the spots that we were making. You could see the spots where my dad had walked up in the night when he went to go out and check, and they weren't even close to like how big these were. So, we looked, we saw that it went to like where the truck had been, pushed it in the snow layers and all that. Like you could see all that where the back tires and everything got moved. So, we're looking, and then we look over towards the woods, and that's when we notice that like the footprints seem to continue into that part of the woods that heads down towards our other neighbor's house that's like a mile or so away. So we turn around, we start looking, and we're like, well, did these lead to our woods, or, was it like kind of circling, doing like a U-turn? And sure enough, like we look and it's going way down through our woods. Like the road would go down pretty far, because back in the, oh goodness, probably early 80s, or might be even late 70s, my grandpa had dug a pond down there because we had a natural spring on our property. So just being curious, we started to go down maybe like half a mile or so, following these in the snow until it got a little bit too steep and we knew it would be too hard to walk back up to the house. And they just kept going right down, like following the road. This area that it led into, more recently, I know it's been logged and stuff. At the time, it was just all forests. There wasn't anything else but hills and forest out there. So a lot of the times, you would hear coyotes. Sometimes you would hear like a cougar if it happened to be in the area. Lots of deer, like that kind of stuff. You would see those prints, obviously, but nothing this big in the snow. We immediately started turning, walking back inside. My mom, she didn't want to scare my little sisters because they were already terrified from the night before. They had heard the noises, and it's something that you don't forget. It's hard to explain because like I've never been hunting, so I don't know if that's like the right way to describe it, but it's like your prey. Like like when you hear that noise, it's like you need to stop moving and kind of hunker down, because if you're seen, like you're gonna get it. It's gonna go after you, kind of thing. So my mom and I were talking, and she's like, yeah, I guess she had been hearing those noises a few nights before too, but they had never been that close up, like through the wood line and stuff. So she had always thought that was just like something far off in the woods, because we'll have neighbors like 20 or 30 miles, outside of the woods. And sometimes we can hear them just on really clear nights, especially when there's nothing going on. You can kind of hear your neighbors. Sometimes they're loud. And so, she just thought with the snow, like sounds echo off of ice and stuff, maybe we're just hearing someone who is doing something. But then that night when all that happened, we heard the yelling, and then my dad's truck being pushed, onto the road there. That's kind of when my dad started to believe Bigfoot, something was going on, because, we had so many other things that had happened before that he always just thought, we're just making it up. We're watching those Bigfoot shows. It's, us just getting stuff in our head, right? But then when it happened to his truck, he's like, well, you girls couldn't have done that. Like, you're not going to be able to arrange for someone to come up and push my truck, because it was very clearly like someone pushed it out of the way. So he couldn't even argue that like someone hit it with something, or it was a handprint on the side of his truck, and like the tires had moved the snow, and it looks like when you open a door with the snow, like things were just, the snow was moved with the tires and everything. But yeah, so my mom and we were talking, and she was like, I don't think it's a good idea for you guys to be going out into the backyard, quote unquote, area. It's just too dangerous. So yeah, after that, we just we stuck to the front yard. Luckily the snow, I think it was 2 or 3 days after that had happened, we wound up getting power back. I think it was like 5 or 6 days later. And by that point, all the snow was gone. So we went out there and we were trying to look for any footprints or anything. But I think because of all the ice and the snow and everything, just nothing was able to like really get into the mud to make anything. But at the same time, like at that point, we were kind of scared too, because it had never got so close to our house before. And with how angry it sounded, like it sounded hungry, like hangry, like upset, looking for stuff. And because it couldn't find anything, it was mad. We just decided it was better just to stay out front, stay really close to the house, don't wander too far. Definitely stay out of the woods. Don't be going anywhere close to the wood line or anything like that. I mean, at times we felt like we would be watched. We wouldn't necessarily see anything watching us, but it's like that predator sense that you would get, like something's there. If I run or if I do the wrong movement, I could trigger something. So you just have to be like really careful. That's really why we started staying closer to the house after that.
That's pretty crazy. I know that those kind of encounters really affect you as a young person, and I know that you've got other encounters all throughout your family. But how have these encounters, and we'll get into this other stuff, but how has those type of encounters affected you as a person?
So my family didn't have money, so it was very scary because you can't go anywhere. I mean, the only other place that we could realistically go was my great aunt's house. That's like 2 or 3 miles down the road, right? Not to give spoilers or anything, but she still lives out there, and she still says that things are watching her. you know, so there wouldn't really be relief. It's just one of those kind of things of, you just gotta, that's there, so you gotta find a way to like live with it. I do have to say that like now in my adult life, so I kind of moved out from there when I was 18 and started being an adult and stuff. I still, as an adult, like if I have nightmares or if I get stressed out, I find myself back in my room, sitting up, going to go grab a glass of water or whatever I was going to go do, and hearing that noise. And, I will know that like stressed out, it'll be whatever I'm stressed out about, but I will be able to like see that image of that thing and hear that noise. And I'm like back there. So yeah, that's definitely something that's always stayed with me is just like, for whatever reason, that always sends me back into that moment of like, okay, like someone's harassing you, back into that moment of like being stalked almost.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people who have these type of encounters, especially with you being so isolated and stuck there, that kind of brings you back to that moment. I think you're kind of in a way describing PTSD. I mean, that's kind of what that does is it triggers that, brings you back to the moment. You're kind of stuck there. When all that was going on and you mentioned, seeing this thing, what kind of details did you get? Were you able to get any kind of details during that encounter?
So what I remember is, and it was really dark, so we just had like the moonlight hitting down. We think that was the male because it was pretty tall. I could see kind of like the outline. I don't remember it having a neck. It was just like head, shoulders, body. It moved so fast that my mom and I couldn't see it very well. That's why we were almost stunned that like it hit my dad's truck and pushed it out the way because we saw it, walking up the road, thought we saw something walking up that road. And then within a matter of seconds, no, instead, something's being pushed out the way. We hear metal being like bent in. So yeah, I wouldn't say I have like great detail of it. But yeah, I just remember seeing something very tall. The taller one that we had seen was probably around like 8 feet tall. My parents and grandparents had a habit of trimming all the tree branches around the edge line up at least around like 8 to 9 feet. So that way you could see through at least the beginning of the woods. Back when my grandparents had first lived out there, they had a lot of problems with people coming up and stealing my grandpa's farming equipment because he would park them over in the woods. So he just cleared out all the branches. So for several feet, like pretty far up, you wouldn't have anything for the first few trees. And then going back, he would kind of stagger it. So they would always stay not up at the front of a line because you could see them. It was almost as if they weren't in the woods, but they would be back just enough back behind the trees that you could kind of tell that the biggest one, I'm pretty sure, was probably around like 8 feet because it was hitting those branches that, my grandpa had trimmed. They had grown up quite a bit. And yeah, I don't ever remember it having like a neck. It just was like head, shoulders, very muscular body. From what I could tell, in the moonlight, it looked like it had really muscular arms, kind of legs. And yeah, it just moved very, very fast.
It's really hard to comprehend how fast these things can move and then how big they are until you actually see one and you kind of get a handle for how big they are. So that doesn't surprise me. These things move extremely fast. They can cover a lot of ground. But you mentioned your grandparents, and I know there's a whole lot to go into with that. But would you mind telling the story about your grandma and calling it the Monkey Man and kind of what happened with that? When you sent me that email, that was really intriguing to me. But would you mind going through that?
So my my grandma, she lived out in that area, all of her life, basically, up until recently when she moved to live with my aunt in town. And then before that, her family lived there, so she comes from this area. They had, I think, probably at least like 200 or 300 acres of between farmland and farmland and forest area that they lived on. So my great grandma had a habit of just releasing the kids, go do your chores. Then after that, you could go into the woods. So my grandma, whenever we would go up to visit her, because at the time we weren't living up there or anything, none of the grandkids were living up there with them. It was just them at the time. She would always warn any of us when we came up that we need to be careful of a monkey man because he takes kids. So you gotta be careful. And we always thought that like, grandma's just trying to scare us. The woods are fun. Like we were worried about getting lost because, that had happened a few times to a few of my cousins. They had got lost in the woods, but we always found them. It wasn't like a major thing where they were lost for hours. It was, probably 10 minutes of looking and then we found them. But she had always warned us that there is something in the woods that would take kids and you got to be careful. I don't think that they called it Bigfoot. That's something that like my mom, when she got my grandma to watch the Bigfoot shows, she started calling it Bigfoot. That's what she calls it to this day. She's been to the Bigfoot Museum in Oregon a bunch of times because she likes all that stuff, growing up with it. She just finds it like a novelty now. But she started telling us stories about how when she was younger, her mom would tell him not to be going into the woods because the monkey man was in there and he was going to take him. And you got to be careful. Well, they could go in there if they were with lumberjacks that they hired to go log the area because they would do logging during certain parts of the year. They could go out if they were with the farmhands because they would go and take care of the cattle and, all the other farm animals that they had on the several acres that they did. They were never allowed to just like go out there alone because the monkey man was more likely to take you or, lure you away or something. So we just saw it with stories. And then my great aunt and a few of her other siblings were like, no, it's really out there, like they never really wanted to say that they had seen it. But their mom was so adamant, my great grandma was so adamant about, you don't go into those woods. Like, you don't go alone. You go with groups of people. You go with people who have weapons, don't care what kind of weapon it is, but you take something and you stay with those people. You don't go out of their sight, you stay with them. So my grandma, she had that habit with us, with her grandkids. Like, not that anyone was going out there logging, but you don't go out there unless there's an adult out there. My grandpa would take his his shotgun or some kind of weapon with us. If we were going down to the pond, he would take something with us. My grandma always just talked about, the monkey man's out there. You gotta be careful. Stay away from a wood line. They'll watch you. They watch what you do. We used to hear like a baby crying, like a small child crying at night, like they were lost and like, they were lost out in the woods. And the problem is that like for our neighbors and everyone who lived around our area, my family was the only one who had any little kids. And you can be darn sure once the sun was setting, we were inside. There's no way we were outside. So quite a few times my grandma would call my mom in the middle of the night going, did one of the girls get outside? I hear crying coming from the woods. And my mom would be like, no. And then my grandma would be like, okay, it's just the monkey man. And then hang up. Well, my mom would be like, oh, those darn coyotes, they're mimicking children and just trying to get us out there. But, my grandma, she would say, oh, that darn monkey man, and just leave it at that, just try and ignore it because it's trying to like lure you out there. So yeah, it's just, growing up with her stories of just avoid the woods. So
that is wild. I wonder, for your grandmother or for your grandma to call it that, I wonder what all she's seen. She's had to see quite a bit for her to talk about it like that. And throughout the years, and it's funny that you mentioned that the baby crying. It comes up a lot. I was talking to a guy named Wyatt, and he was telling me about an encounter. I believe it was in Arkansas, and they had a similar situation where him and his wife were out in the woods. They heard a baby crying, and that's really typical for them to do that, to lure you out there. And I think that they definitely do have a tendency to take women and children, and it's pretty amazing to me, the heritage that you had passed down to you from your grandma telling you all that, and I'm sure that really did have a big impact on your life. I know you mentioned in your email a story about some tree knocking you guys did that could have went south really bad. Could you tell us about that?
yeah, we lived up there, and every now and then my aunt would come up with my two male cousins. For whatever reason, on my grandma's side, she basically had all females, and then my mom and her sisters all basically had females except for my one aunt. So my only two boy cousins would come over every now and then, just to hang out, see the grandparents and stuff. I do believe that day my grandparents were gone, so they just came up to come and see us for a little bit. I think that the plan was just to like get the pool set up because at that time my mom had just bought a like above ground pool, but my dad had dug down with an excavator in the hill next to the house, so we could like kind of do in ground pool kind of thing. So my aunt, I think she was going to come over and help us get set up with that, but that did not wind up happening at all. So, my mom and my aunt are busy talking about what they were going to do and stuff. And they're like, just go outside, play for a little bit. We're going to get organized and we'll be out there in a little bit with you. Well, right before they got there, my mom was watching one of the Bigfoot shows. I think it was like Finding Bigfoot or it was one of the really old one, like the Discovery ones where they had the really bad CG. So it was one of those. And my youngest cousin, he was watching it and he has no fear. Even today, as an adult, he's been deployed overseas and served in war and been a hospital doctor and all this stuff. Like, he has no fear. So that has never gone away. But he saw someone wood knocking on the TV show. And so when my mom said, go outside, go play for a little bit, like go entertain yourselves, basically, he got the bright idea. Well, let's go take a piece of wood since you guys are always talking about Bigfoot, and, I'll go knock on the cherry tree that's out heading towards the bank. So, my sisters and I and his brother, we're just talking, just kind of catching up a little bit because we hadn't seen each other for a while. And we look over and we see that his brother has a big old stick and walking over to the tree. And we're like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm just going to test something out, just kind of like the don't worry about it vibes. So we're just all kind of standing there watching him now because we're like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? So he goes over and he just whacks the stick against the tree as loud as he can. And then he does it like 2 or 3 more times. And, we're like, why are you doing that? Like, are you trying to get something to come over here to us? My sisters and I are looking at each other panic, like, why would you do that? Like, that's a dumb idea. And he is standing over there being like, oh, you guys are cowards. Like, nothing's happening. Given he's only like 7 or 8, he's not that old. So he's just like, you guys are chickens. You believe in Santa Claus because you believe in Bigfoot, like trying to insult us and like that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden we hear crashing coming from the other side of the hill. So we were kind of like in a valley kind of thing where we were up on one hill. My grandparents had cut that road going down to the pond. And then on the other side, there was a big hill with a whole bunch of trees and like that kind of stuff. We had a little creek that ran in between the two sides of the hill. So we hear something coming from the other side of the hill. And my cousin decides to go and wood knock again because, like, it worked the first time. So he does it a few more times. And at this point, my sisters and I are screaming because, like, something's coming up fast. And we've been on those hills to where, like, you can't, it's full of berry briars, scotch bush, just like any number of things that will grab onto you and make it difficult to, like, push your way through, that area, plus all the trees and everything else. This sounds like something is coming up fast. So we start screaming because as it gets closer and closer, my cousin is still knocking over there by the edge of the freaking, thing area. It's where I described earlier where my dad would go and dump all the concrete and, fill dirt and like that kind of stuff. So he's right at that edge, knocking on a tree that was over there. And we can hear something like hit that dirt and, start to like make their way up. We hear concrete slabs moving down. We hear stuff. So at that point, we scream and we go inside. We were screaming. We're like, nope, I don't want to see what's coming up because it sounds angry and it's fast and I don't want to be here. So, we didn't even get to the door and my mom is already there with her sister because she's thinking, one of the kids killed themselves. Like, we're out in the country. They probably like jumped out of a tree or, like they probably killed themselves somehow. Right. My mom is just always like, she always thinks that we like maimed or injured ourselves terribly. So she's like, who's hurt? What's going on? And, my cousin's still over there at the edge of the bank. Just, he's not knocking anymore because he's like, what is this? Like, what is coming towards me? So I'm telling my mom, he was wood knocking, he's wood knocking, something's coming up. She unlocks her SUV and my aunt's freaking out because she grew up out here too. She knows the stuff. She always acted like she didn't believe it, But I knew in that moment, like when my mom was like, get in the car, we're going. And we could hear something crashing through, like stomping on some of the concrete, like cracking it or breaking it. That sound of concrete breaking. You could hear that as it was like trying to climb up. So my cousin's still over there. His brother runs over, grabs him. We all run over to my mom's SUV and we leave because we're like, we're not staying around to see what's here because the house, if it wanted to get in, all that it had to do was push its hand like it did on my dad's truck, and it would have been in the house. So all this is before the ice storm too. This is a few years before the ice storm and everything else had happened. So we go into town, we spend a few hours in town, even though we weren't planning on doing that that day. And then we come back home, and my mom is, like skeptical. She's like, okay, we need to be careful going up to the house. Let's just go and look. So my aunt and her get out, they go look around, and my mom was like, okay, just, we're not going to worry about the pool. We'll do that later. Just, I think you guys should go home. We're just going to stay inside. We're not going to be doing anything. So after they left, I'm like, Mom, like, what's going on? And she's like, there were footprints up on the edge of the bank over there where my cousin had been at, hitting the tree. And it was an old cherry tree that my cousin had been hitting on. And some of those thick branches had been snapped. So she was just like, it's not worth it to be out and about. We just need to stay inside, be quieter, and, hope that was gone. So, yeah, my cousin got a response, but like we bailed. We were not about to stick around and see what had enough energy and force and like strength to get up that kind of hill, because this was loose dirt that had concrete and other stuff in it. It's not like solid ground that you could just run, and really get up. So yeah, and then her being able to see the footprints up there at the top of the bank, us seeing the broken branch on the cherry tree and being like, none of us could do that. Like, we had a hammock up on there that could hold people, and it was now broken. So we were like, nope.
Well, I bet that probably converted your cousin into a believer after something like that, and that's pretty crazy, man. That could have went south really fast, and kudos to your mom to get you out of there as quick as she did, and she had every right to be concerned. I mean, that these things don't mess around, and obviously it triggered it somehow, or it wouldn't have come barreling through the brush like it did. I know there's a lot that you had happen on the property, and this goes back several years, but what's the closest you ever came to one of these creatures, and probably one of the scariest encounters you've had?
Yeah. So going back to like that time when we were setting up the pool. So we had got the pool set up, and to the house, it was even closer than what my dad's truck was. So my dad's truck was over by where my parents' room was. The swimming pool that my parents set up was maybe 10 feet away from my sisters and I's room. So they had one corner, and then I had the other corner. So we were like kind of sandwiched there. So they definitely had like the direct wall right there next to the pool. But there will be several times that like after, so we were on well water. So it took us, quite a few days to fill up the pool with water. But after we had it filled up, we started noticing that like at first it was just a little bit of water was missing. You could tell that like there was a water line. It was probably a foot or two of water that was missing. No big deal. I guess, we'll just fill it up. But then it became like more and more apparent. Like it was almost 3 or 4 feet of water that we were having to fill up. And it would again start taking us days to fill up the pool. So, and at that point, it was also getting really hot too. So I remember quite a few nights I would be up with my sisters. We would just be in the room watching TV, again with the lights off, but just, TV on, watching whatever. And every now and then we would hear like splashing. And we would be like, well, that's weird because no one's in the bathroom. No one's outside. No one should be in the pool. We know that raccoons and, other things would get in the pool. But like, this is like a person splashing, like, kids play splashing in the pool. So we got the courage to just, like barely move the blinds and just kind of see what we could see out there, because we were just relying on the moon to try and see out there. And my sisters and I, as we're like, well, not my youngest sister, but my other sister and I, as we're looking through, we see like two heads in the water, like two kid heads, not like normal kids, but like smaller Sasquatch, basically, like no neck, but head, shoulders, like standing in the pool, splashing around, and then that terrifies us because, well, if there's smaller ones, there's going to be bigger ones. So we just kind of look, and then we look down to where it was leading towards the woods, and there were like larger figures standing there. So we were immediately like, well, nope, we're just going to go out to the living room and chill out there. So we wound up having to do that for, I think, almost a week straight, because every night My mom kept adding water. She didn't believe us that we were hearing that kind of thing. She just thought that we were being dramatic or whatever. But there was a significant amount of water that we were missing like almost every single day. And she would have to refill it. So we started staying out there. And then I think it was towards the end of that heat wave for like, it was 4 or 5 days or so. She was like, "What are you guys doing out in the living room, Sarah? Still?" And we're like, "Well, they're splashing, so we're not going to be over there." Again, we didn't want to be, there's just a glass window. So, you know, nothing's really giving us protection against something if it wants to come through. It's glass. It could easily break that. So, we're like, we're not going over there. We're staying, as far away from this as we can. So she takes me over because I'm the oldest. And she's like, "No, you guys are being ridiculous. You and me, we're going to go. You're going to tell your sisters that you don't see anything. I don't see anything. You guys are going to go to bed." So I go over there with her and I'm like, "All right." I make her go first because I'm not going to go first. I already know what's there. And as soon as we get past my room and going into my sister's room, we hear splashing, a lot of splashing, more splashing than what we had heard before. And my mom was like, "Is that the raccoons?" Because we had raccoons in the pool before, and you could kind of hear them splashing. They kind of more sound like dogs than like people splashing. And I'm like, "No, no, it's not raccoons." So she walks over to the window and she, like moves the blinds so she can see, and she just was like, "Oh my God, come here." So I walk over there and you can see like all four of them were in the pool. The tall one was just standing up, just kind of standing there. He was kind of splashing back and forth a little bit too, but it seemed like the mom and the kids were just having a blast. They were just splashing each other, splashing around in the pool. We didn't really have like floaty pool ties, but we had the dive ones where they would be down at the bottom. They were taking those and throwing them up and like letting them sink down and like picking them up, throwing them again, not diving down, but just like reaching down, picking them up, throwing them. And then after that, my mom just like, she stopped filling up the pool. She was just kind of done with it at that point. She was like, it's too much water to be constantly refilling. And summer, it's not going to get hotter. So, we'll just deal with it as it goes. But yeah, I think that was one of the more close encounters that we've had. That was, just because it was so close, like the kids were so close, the adults were more far away. And then when I went with my mom, it was a good probably 20 or 30 radius swimming pool, and they were on the other side, like looking at us. So I would not be surprised if they did not see us looking at them through the window. Because I mean, I would assume that they would have really good eyes. So they did not bother to leave. They stayed splashing. We just were like, "Nope, we're going back over here," and that was that.
Well, yeah, I can understand why you felt that way. That's way too close for comfort. I would have went on the other side of the trailer too. And it's kind of strange some of the behaviors these things have. I don't understand why they do some of the things that they do. It's just really odd to me. There's not really a good way to answer this question, but why do you think that they were on the property?
We think that they just like they live in the area. So going back to when the snow had happened and we had all that, obviously I had several friends that lived out kind of in the same area, but across the highway. So it was probably 50, 60 miles apart easily, and forests and everything else like that, forest, farmland, all that kind of stuff. So I remember going back to school when winter break was over, and my friends who lived over on the other side of the highway coming up to me and wanting to talk to me in private. And, they were concerned that they had experienced something too. They wouldn't really tell me like if they had seen anything, but they definitely had seen like footprints, kind of like what we were seeing in the snow. They heard calls and yells, kind of like what we were hearing. There was probably 5 or 6 of my friends that just kind of scattered throughout the area over there that had heard something similar. So I think it's just like, I think that they have limited migration areas that they go to, but I think that at least the group that my family has had experiences with, I think that it lives in that area just because it was, at least at that time, so densely forested. Most of my family, like my grandma's sisters and stuff, they still own all of the property that they had bought from their parents when they passed. So there's, a good 20, 30 acres of just forest land that hasn't been touched. That might not ever be touched, to be honest, because their kids already own it and they don't have plans of logging it or living out there. It's just kind of like a legacy thing that, it's been in the family, keep it in the family. So yeah, I think that they just live out there. My great grandparents, my grandparents all having stories from growing up and, having them just kind of living with them. I wouldn't say coexisting, but they know that they're there.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's kind of the perfect habitat for them. They got land, food, water, isolation, all the things. So it makes sense that maybe they were there. And, I think sometimes these things migrate through places and they're kind of there seasonally. And then sometimes they just find a place and they stay. I don't know what the difference is or why they do that. But, having this many encounters and this history, family history with these things, what do you think Bigfoot is?
I don't know. It's hard to tell like what they are, because at times they act so much like us, like playing in the water, throwing toys up and, like letting them sink down, interacting with tools, I guess, having emotions like being frustrated that like the food supplies down because it's so cold. Or maybe they just don't like the cold because, I know I remember from walking through those layers of ice and snow, it would cut you up, even through your clothes. Like the ice was so sharp, it would cut you up. So, uh, they definitely seem to have emotions too, but at the same time, they're so animal like, it's hard to picture them as human like us, but they also have those qualities. So it's just so hard to say.
I don't think that there's a right answer one way or the other. I think we're all taking educated guesses, and I go back and forth a lot of times on what these things are. I think the truest statement that I've ever been able to find with these things is when they're flesh and blood, they're flesh and blood, and when they're not, they're not. I mean, there's just so much to these things, and I think maybe there's different kinds. And you run into a bad one, you're going to have a really bad day, but then you have the ones that are like on your property. They never bothered you. They just were there. They never really, seemed to do anything other than that one where the tree knocking incident. And it probably was just very aggravated that something was bothering it. Maybe, I don't know, but really incredible story, a lot of history there. And I appreciate you sharing that. What would you to say to somebody listening to this podcast tonight that is kind of on the fence on whether they believe in Bigfoot or not? What would you say to them to maybe convince them that this is real, or what advice would you give them?
I mean, I think for a lot of things in life, this is true. It's hard to rationalize that something is real until you experience it, I mean, that's with so many things in our everyday life. You just out of sight, out of mind, it doesn't matter to you. I think that, people who are on the fence about it, I think it's great having an open mind. People who are closed minded and don't think that these things are real, kind of like my dad. I mean, it will take having something like that to convince you. So, I wouldn't wish encounters on anyone. But if you do want to have encounters, just saying Mount Hood area in Oregon can rent, cabins out there. My sister has a lot of experiences going out there and camping with her partner and stuff. A lot of weird stuff out there. So, I think if you wanted to go and find them, not that it would be easy, but I feel like if you actually listen to like the locals out there, they're gonna know what's going on. I mean, they may not want to talk about it. Like my grandparents definitely don't want to talk about it. My grandma, she'll bring it up from time to time because she's just used to it. She doesn't mind talking about it anymore. But like when she was warning us about the monkey men, it wasn't a good thing to be talking about. She didn't want to be warning us, telling us about some like demon basically that was going to grab us and take us. And then, the flip side of that is all the other kids who didn't grow up with that and they don't know about the monkey man. What are you talking about? The monkey man that lives in the woods that takes people? Like, you're crazy. So I think it's just a lot of those experiences that if people don't have them, they're going to be really close minded. So yeah, if you're on the fence, I think it's great. Keep an open mind. If you're not, it's just going to be a lot harder to have an experience, I think, because you'll have to do a lot more work to like meet people who live in the area, take the time to figure out like if they're seasonal, if they migrate or not. Because ours, I believe that they somewhat migrated through our area just because it was so big. And it would be so easy to, go around 200 plus acres of just forest. You could easily follow a deer and any other game that's going through there. So, it would take a lot of effort and research, but I think that you could definitely do it if you really wanted to. For the people who already have had encounters, I think a lot of us are on the same page. You don't wish it on anyone. It's just something that kind of happens. And like there was a time where my mom, she invested in trail cams because she was so set on getting a picture and trying to submit it to the Bigfoot shows or like to anyone that would listen to her, and that kind of thing. And I don't know what they are able to do, but you just can't take good pictures. And back when it was the early 2000s, we had flip phones, so pictures aren't going to be great on a phone. So I think if you just want picture proof or like that kind of thing, is going to be way harder. I think they have a way of messing with technology and like that kind of thing. I think you just have to actually experience it.
I agree. I think that's some really good, solid advice too to people that are watching that aren't sure. And I do agree with you with the technology side of things. And I think we're getting to the point now that with AI and all the other stuff that's happening, I think pictures are going to become less and less important, because how are you going to know if it's real? I think real stories, real people, real encounters, and people getting boots on the ground and going out there and experiencing this is how people are going to learn about it. I wonder a lot of times how many people are sitting on the fence with these encounters and they just don't want to talk about it, right? They don't want to say, hey, this is what happened to me. So I appreciate you being brave enough to come forward to share that, because I think it's important that people know these things are real and they know that they're out there. So I really enjoyed having you on the show, Samantha. If you have anything happen in the future, I would love to hear about it. So make sure to reach out to me and let me know.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Josh.
Well, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you being brave enough to come forward and share that story. It takes a lot of guts to do that. So, guys, thanks for hanging out with me and Samantha tonight. What a credible encounter. And it's such a strange world. There's so much in God's universe I just don't understand. And I don't know what you do with some of these stories. And I'm fortunate to be able to sit here and to get these stories out to you guys, but I couldn't do it without y'all. If anybody's out there watching tonight and you've got an encounter you would like to tell and share with the audience, you can always email me at MysteriesUknownPodcast@gmail.com. I'm so fortunate that I get to sit here and talk about these encounters with you guys. And I'm just really thankful for everybody who's been on the show and for you guys who watch. But I'm going to say it. It's the most important thing you can do, guys. Stay prayed up. We'll see you in the next episode. Hey, just real quick before I go anywhere, I just want to shout out to all the members tonight: Rosie, Troy, Joe Bart, Adlin Morris, Honeybee, Shell Bell, Aubrey Everblessed, Steamboat, Ray Sting 12, CD, D. Chavez Custom. I won't butcher some of these names, but I appreciate you guys being here. Kimberly Morgan, Scott B., Angie Shelb, Maxine, Jake Edger. I think I said that right, Jake. Brenda Sinning, Robin Jenkins, Kimberly Compton, Mike. Looks like it's Mike Manny, Angie, Cena, Denise, Susan Whitsett, Wyatt. Sorry, dude, I didn't mean to mess your name up. Alexandria 85, Jess Goodman, Tamu Young, Alberto Santos, Nick, Maggie Johnson, Evan Pickett, Jose Alvaredo, Laura Walker, D. Craigs, Tina, I'm going to mess your last name up, Zaragazal, I'm sorry, Robert Carisso, Tahira Nolan, DQ, Thomas Sheehan, What's My Name? That's awesome. Cryptic Chaos, Colonel Greasebag McQueen, you're awesome. Dana Gibson, Mandy Bartley, Michelle Powell, Bobby Yance, Barbara Mellon, Vicky Parker, Janet Kendall, Stephen, Anthony Swords, Tap Rad, Ashes Antics, Matthew Critchley, Renee Drew, Bigfoot Society, Wade Fisher Outdoors, what's up, buddy? Richie P, Lewis Hunt, Kim Anderson, Chris Catslaw, I'm sure I messed that up, Sawdust, Dennis Conroy, Janny the Wonder Woman, Taft the Wanderer, David Belcher, and my buddy Daniel Hamilton. Shout out to all you members. I just wanted to give you guys a quick shout out and say thanks for the support. We'll see you guys next episode.